When you think of ancient Greece, what comes to mind? Probably things like epic philosophy, amazing myths, and of course, the birth of democracy. But have you ever wondered how it all started? How this one civilization ended up laying the foundation for so much of our modern world? Well, the answer, believe it or not, is written right into the rocks and coastlines of Greece itself. Let's dig in.
So that's the big question, right? How on earth did a place like this, all rugged mountains and scattered islands, become the cradle for ideas that would literally change the course of human history? It seems totally backwards. But what we're going to see is that the challenging landscape wasn't a bug. It was a feature.
All right, so if you really want to get a grip on the Greek mindset, you first have to understand the world they lived in. Their entire story, everything that came after, really begins with their unique and incredibly demanding geography.
Okay, so let's get our boots on the ground, so to speak. Geographically, Greece is basically a collection of peninsulas, big fingers of land sticking out into the water, along with hundreds and hundreds of islands. It's really more a place of sea and mountains than it is of wide-open plains.
And you can imagine, this kind of landscape totally shaped how they lived. I mean, good luck trying to travel by land when there's a massive mountain range in your way. It was often way easier to just get in a boat. On top of that, only about a quarter of the land was even usable for farming. So what happened? Communities grew up totally isolated from each other, separated by the sea or by those towering mountains. They had to become fiercely independent.
Now, way before guys like Socrates and Plato showed up, this tough landscape was actually home to some of Europe's first advanced civilizations. So let's take a look at these early pioneers who were trying to build something that would last.
Okay, so the story here goes way, way back. We're talking 3500 BCE, with the Minoans on the island of Crete. Then came the Mycenaeans on the mainland, a much more warlike bunch. But then, around 1100 BCE, everything just collapsed. It kicked off a period we call the Greek Dark Ages. It was kind of like someone hit the societal reset button, and it stayed that way for hundreds of years.
And you can really see two completely different ways of life here. The Minoans, they were islanders, masters of the sea. They were traders who built these huge, beautiful, open palaces. The Mycenaeans on the mainland, though, total opposite. They were warriors, and they built massive fortified cities designed to be defended. Two very different answers to the question of how to survive in this part of the world.
So after those Mycenaean fortresses fell, they kind of fell apart for a while. The skill of writing was actually lost, trade pretty much stopped, but the culture didn't vanish. It just went underground, kept alive through word of mouth. History became stories, passed down through generations in epic poems like the Iliad.
All right, so after centuries of, darkness, what happens when the lights come back on in Greece? Something totally new and different had taken root. It wasn't one big, unified kingdom. No, it was something far more interesting, and it was a direct result of that isolating geography we were just talking about.
What emerged was this incredible idea, the city-state, or polis as they called it. You have to understand, places like Athens, Sparta, or Corinth, they weren't just cities in the country of Greece. For all intents and purposes, they were their own countries. Each one had its own laws, its own army, its own government. They were fiercely independent.
And they all kind of followed a similar playbook. You'd find a high, rocky hill called an acropolis right at the center. That was your fortress, your safe spot. And built around that, each city-state would develop its own unique customs and, crucially, its own independent government. This setup, this independence is what allowed for so much creativity and experimentation.
And this is where things get really interesting. This is the main event. Because all these little independent city-states weren't just competing with each other for land or trade. They were competing in the world of ideas. Especially the biggest idea of all. How should people govern themselves?
Getting to democracy wasn't a straight line. It was messy. Most places started out as aristocracies, where a few rich and powerful families called all the shots. Then, sometimes a single, strong leader, a tyrant, would seize power, usually by promising to help out the common people. But in one city, Athens, they decided to try one final, absolutely radical step. And that step was democracy. The word literally means rule by the people. It was a crazy idea at the time. Instead of the wealthiest or the strongest or some king telling you what to do, the citizens themselves would hold the power. They would vote on the laws, they would choose their leaders, they would be the government.
So picture this. The year is around 500 BCE. In the busy, thriving, and fiercely independent city-state of Athens, this wild idea of rule by the people starts to become a reality. This is the moment everything changes. Okay, let's be real here. This was democracy version 1.0, and it had some major bugs. The definition of citizen was super narrow. It was basically just for free adult men. Women, slaves, foreigners, none of them got a vote. But even with those massive limitations, the core idea that a citizen should have a direct say in their government was an absolute game changer for the world.
So let's pull back for a second. Why does any of this matter to us today? Because the story of ancient Greece isn't just about dusty ruins and old myths. It's about a chain reaction of ideas that we are still dealing with every single day.
It really boils down to the simple but powerful chain reaction. The tough geography forced them to be independent. That fierce independence created a culture of competition and innovation. And that drive to innovate led them to create brand new ways of thinking about society itself. And that, right there, is the big takeaway. This completely radical idea, born out of isolation and necessity in the rocky hills of Greece, became the very foundation for so many of the political systems we see all over the world today. It's an idea that is still shaping our lives.
Which kind of makes you stop and think, doesn't it? The Greeks faced their own set of unique challenges, their own mountains and seas, and they responded by inventing something revolutionary. So what about us? What are our mountains? And what are the radical new ideas we're coming up with right now that people might still be talking about 2,500 years from today?